Critics will claim that Michael Jackson's fans are desperately trying to prove Michael's innocence. That claim is false for the simple fact that it is not possible. None of us have been around Michael Jackson 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year for his complete adult life. It is an impossibility to prove something did not happen. What is possible is to examine the allegations in depth and determine if there's any truth to them. Of course, there are those in Michael's fan base who defend him without basic knowledge of the allegations, but the naysayers who take the time to debate with Michael's fans will notice that most of them are able to shower the critics with facts for days on end. As we showed in our previous video, that the mainstream media is exhibiting only the allegations, while willingly ignoring the side of the defense. We make these videos so that people have a rebuttal archive to go back to when debating the critics, but also for the people who do not know the whole story in order to educate them, and in some cases, maybe even change their minds. Critics often mention that Jackson allegedly used adult magazines to groom children as to sexually abuse them. They claim that the prosecution allegedly found semen on his bed that was not his, and argue after they can't come up with anything valid that unrelated children slept in the same bed with him, so he must be guilty. The only thing that Jackson is guilty of is not explaining himself well enough, which is why we will do it for him. During the 2005 trial, the prosecution argued that the fingerprints of Gavin and Star Avizo were found on some of Jackson's adult magazines. They argue that it proved their claim that Jackson showed them these magazines, but there are several problems with this conclusion. The first important fact to mention is that the adult magazine with the accuser's fingerprints was tested for prints only after the boy handled the magazine at a grand jury proceeding in April of 2004. It was also shown during the trial that the Arvizo boys weren't as naive and innocent when it came to pornography as the prosecution tried to portray them. In his grand jury testimony in April 2004, Star Arvizo testified that he and his brother had surfed porn websites before. When confronted with a transcript of this testimony, Star Arvizo replied that it was just a paragraph that somebody wrote. In his opening statement, Mesereau stated that rather than showing the magazines to the boys, Jackson actually caught them once with the magazines and took them away from the children. He stated, "The prosecutor told you that there were girly-type magazines and sexually explicit material in Mr. Jackson's home. And there were. Mr. Jackson will freely admit that he does read girly magazines from time to time, and what he does is he sends someone to the local market, and they pick up Playboy, and they pick up Hustler, and he has read them from time to time. He absolutely denies showing them to children, and in fact, the magazines the prosecutor referred to were in a locked briefcase. Mr. Jackson will tell you he found those kids going through his magazines, and he grabbed them from them, and he locked them in his briefcase." There is evidence of Gavin and Star going into Jackson's bedroom when Jackson was not present. Gavin denied this on the stand, but his brother Star later admitted in his testimony that they did. Not only did they go into Jackson's bedroom, they even slept there when Jackson wasn't around. In fact, Star Avizo testified that he knew the code to get into Jackson's bedroom. That means they were perfectly able to go through Jackson's belongings whenever they pleased, which would be consistent with their behavior around other people as well. Jackson's lawyer, Thomas Mesereau, pointed this out during his closing arguments based on various testimonies heard during the trial. He stated, "And the forensic evidence they had to hang their hat on are fingerprints on some girly magazines that were owned by Michael Jackson. And you know that everywhere the Arvizo children went, they would rummage through drawers, they would rummage through the house, they did it at the dentist office, they did it at Vernee Watson Johnson's home. This is the way they behave." During cross-examination, Mesereau showed Star Avizo a copy of Barely Legal and repeatedly asked if this was the specific magazine Jackson had shown him and Gavin. Gavin insisted over and over again that indeed it was, only for Mesereau to reveal that it had been published in August of 2003, no less than 5 months after the Arvizo family's departure from Neverland. This information went almost entirely unreported, as the media was micro-focused on the allegations, disregarding the cross-examination by Mesereau, which blatantly undermined the boys' testimony. The prosecution's theory was that Jackson showed the Arvizo boys the magazines to groom them, to lower their inhibitions and or arouse them before sexually molesting them, because that is typically what pedophiles use pornographic magazines for. During the 2005 trial, Gavin testified that he first saw the suitcase that contained Jackson's adult magazines next to a couch in a room where he was hanging out with Jackson while Jackson was putting on makeup. He indicates that he picked it up and he opened it to look through it, after which Jackson grabbed the suitcase and, clearly embarrassed, claimed they were Frank Cassio's magazines. In a later account, he claims the briefcase was next to Jackson's bed, and he, Starr, and Jackson went through the magazines while making fun of Frank. These alleged scenes do not make much sense as attempts to groom the Arvizo boys in order to molest them. First, because according to the boys' own words, no molestation or sexual act followed after the story of the magazines. But the alleged molestation happened on totally different occasions and with no mention of pornography being shown to Gavin at all. Second, as for lowering inhibitions, according to Gavin's story, Jackson was clearly embarrassed and tried to distance himself from the material, claiming they were Frank Cassio's. He allegedly even made fun of Frank because he allegedly used phrases like "Frank sneaking ass." Jackson disassociating himself with the magazines is obviously not in line with an intent to groom a child and participating in a sexual act. The defense claimed that the boys went into Jackson's room when he was not present and looked at the magazines on their own. This is supported by Starr Arvizo's testimony that they knew the code to Jackson's bedroom so they could enter whenever they wanted. It's crucial to mention that the adult magazine story originates with the Arvizos. Neither Jordan Chandler nor Jason Franciette ever made such a claim, likely because they never found any of Jackson's magazines in the house. The pornography claims only became part of the molestation stories after it became publicly known during the Arvizo trial that Jackson in fact had such material at all, and the prosecution had publicly stated their theory that Jackson used it for grooming children. Robson and Safechuck built their stories in 2013 and 2014 with that hindsight information from the 2005 case. In fact, Robson was shown this material by the prosecution on the stand during his testimony in 2005, claiming he had no idea Jackson even owned magazines like that. Another gem that critics include in their evidence list is something that was even dismissed by the prosecution in 2005. They didn't even try to introduce it to the court. On January 18, 2005, Jackson's defense filed a motion to exclude 14 items of irrelevant evidence. Among them were 2 DNA reports carried out by the prosecution that did not uncover anything incriminating. One report included 3 sets of male DNA found on Jackson's bed. One was Jackson's DNA, the other 2 of unknown males, but they did not belong to the alleged victims. There was never any mention of it being semen. The second report was about DNA found on bed sheets that were found in a dirty laundry bag along with underwear. Again, the DNA did not belong to the alleged victims. In their reply on January 31, 2005, prosecution agreed with the defense that the DNA on the bed was irrelevant, as they informed them that they did not intend to refer to that evidence in court. Prosecution suggests in their reply that the DNA came from semen stains, but at this point they knew it could not be proven otherwise, since that evidence would not be introduced into court, meaning the defense would never have their own forensic examination of it. Ultimately, the prosecution knew that it was not incriminating evidence, otherwise they would have tried to introduce it. Keep in mind that people would stay in Jackson's bedroom when he was not at home. For example, during the trial on March 23, 2005, there was a discussion about the legal, heterosexual material found on one of Jackson's computers. From that discussion, we learned that according to the evidence on this computer, whoever used the nickname Marcel Jackson accessed the computer on November 17th of 2003 when Jackson was in Las Vegas, where he stayed until after the raid on November 18th. It is believed that Marcel Jackson is one of Michael's adult cousins. Members of Jackson's staff also testified to the fact that people sometimes stayed in Jackson's bedroom when he was not there. Regarding alleged laundry service, the DNA in underpants that the prosecution did try to introduce sounds bad in their motion. They claim that Jackson kept underwear belonging to another male. But in the defense's reply on February 8, 2005, we learned that what that underwear actually was. Basically, the prosecution wanted to introduce underwear from another male. It was not found in Jackson's bedroom, but in a different building in a storage area with other miscellaneous items of laundry. They wanted to use it as evidence of Jackson keeping other males' underwear for nefarious reasons. They tried to use it to support Gavin's claim that Jackson kept his underwear, even though Gavin's underwear was never found at Neverland. This is how desperate the prosecution was, yet they refrained from wanting to use the DNA on the bed, which tells us that it was an even weaker piece of evidence than the ridiculous tighty-whitey story. Once again, the prosecution practiced extreme mental gymnastics to try to create evidence in the absence of real, damning evidence. Not surprisingly, Judge Melville deemed this evidence irrelevant and did not allow the prosecution to introduce this to his court. Tom Snedden, as vicious and evil as he was not a dumb man. He was a seasoned prosecutor with a clear obsession to get Jackson behind bars, and he had all the support in the world to get that done. But he failed, not once, but twice. Not because he was a bad prosecutor. He failed because the evidence he introduced was not proof of any wrongdoing on Jackson's part, and the testimonies by the accusers were so inconsistent, and in some cases even proven lies, that they were not believed by the jury. Technically, every testimony is considered evidence, but that does not say anything about the truthfulness and credibility of that testimony. You can have two totally contradictory testimonies about an event in a case, and technically, both are considered evidence, but only one of them can be true. If evidence would equal proof, why would it need to be tried in a court? There have been cases where people were on trial with much more evidence against them than the prosecution ever had against Jackson, and they were proven to be innocent. Your neighbor can accuse you tomorrow of molesting his child. That doesn't make it true. People lie and false testimonies exist. No one can deny that fact, for it happens daily. One of the reasons why we have a legal system and the right to a fair trial is to listen to these testimonies and assess their truthfulness in the light of other testimonies and the presented evidence. Jordan Chandler, the 1993 accuser, was never cross-examined. He never testified in court. In actuality, any time it came to subjecting himself to cross-examination, Jordan was nowhere to be found. The Chandlers went to civil court before going to the police, got what they wanted, and refused to testify in a criminal court. Since their testimonies was all the prosecution had, 2 grand juries refused to indict. Gavin Arvizo and Jason Francia did testify in 2005. The jury did not find them credible, and with good reason. We have gone into detail about both of them in previous videos. Gavin Arvizo's brother Starr took the stand early in the trial and claimed to have witnessed 2 specific acts of molestation, but his testimony was inconsistent. Regarding one alleged act, he claimed in court that Jackson had been fondling Gavin with his hand, but in a previous description of the same incident, he told a different story, claiming that Jackson had been rubbing his penis against Gavin's buttocks. He also told 2 different stories about the other alleged act on 2 consecutive days in court. Important to mention is that it was revealed in court that Janet Arvizo signed a document prepared by the Sheriff's Department that said the following: "From time to time between January 1st, 2000 and the present date, I consulted one or more of those lawyers concerning Michael Jackson's interaction with me and my children at Neverland Ranch in Santa Barbara County and elsewhere." The Arvizos didn't meet Jackson until August of 2000. When Janet Arvizo was confronted regarding the date of her signed statement, she responded by saying, "Since August, the same thing," and rambles on without answering the question, but did mention one of the lawyers, George Owen Feldman, who was associated in the law office of Feldman and Rothstein. They represented Janet Arvizo during the J.C. Penney case, where she sued the company for battery, false imprisonment, and infliction of emotional distress. At the time, no sexual assault was alleged, but almost a year later, their complaint was amended and sexual assault allegations were added. They settled for over $150,000. In a testimony on May 24, 2005, Mary Holzer, an office manager and paralegal who worked for the law offices of Feldman and Rothstein that represented the Arvizos in the J.C. Penney case, testified Janet Arvizo admitted to her that she was lying about the photographs of her bruises that were used to prove her allegations against J.C. Penney. The photograph showed Janet Arvizo with bruises that she claimed she got during the altercation with the J.C. Penney guards. However, according to Holzer, Janet Arvizo admitted to her that the bruises were not caused by the J.C. Penney guards, but by her own husband. When the Arvizos wanted to claim their pot of gold from the bank of Michael Jackson, they were told by their civil lawyer that they had to get a conviction in criminal court first. Had that not been the case, the Arvizos, like the Chandlers, would have gone to civil court straight away to see if they could repeat what the Chandlers did and get rich. Wade Robson and James Safechuck both continually changed their stories. When there were no financial gain for them, they both testified under oath that Jackson never touched them. Now, with hundreds of millions of dollars at stake, they miraculously remember that Jackson did allegedly molest them, and not once, but hundreds of times, even recalling very graphic details. There are many problems with their new claims. Robson, for example, claimed he was abused hundreds of times, including on one occasion where his family went to the Grand Canyon without him. Yet, from their own 2016 depositions, we know that they were only at Neverland while Jackson was there a handful of times, and that the whole family went to the Grand Canyon, including Wade.
Leaving Neverland contradicts the alleged victim's own sworn depositions. In the video, Wade Robson spins a dramatic tale of being left alone in 1990 with Michael Jackson at Neverland. Robson claims that while his family was hundreds of miles away at the Grand Canyon, Michael Jackson abused him for the first time. But that's not the story Robson told in his lawsuit against Jackson's companies or in a deposition under penalty of perjury just months before HBO's cameras began rolling. There, he claims his family was still at Neverland when it first happened, and his sister was sleeping upstairs in Michael's room. Two entirely different versions of events told by Wade Robson, just 2 months apart.
The first night, the night prior, we both slept in the bed with Michael. And at some point that second night, she said to me, I think we should, you and I should sleep upstairs. I don't know why. I don't know why she said that or why she thought that, but I didn't want to. So whenever it was bedtime, she went upstairs and Michael and I stayed in the bed downstairs. And I believe at some point that night the abuse started.
So which is it? The version Wade Robson tells in a sworn deposition, or his version in Leaving Neverland? If he changes his story in 2 months for the cameras, how can you trust him at all? But that's not all. Earlier testimony by Robson and his mother contradict the entire 1990 story told in Leaving Neverland that director Dan Reed uses as a foundation for the film. Robson's mother Joy testified in 1993 that her son was never alone with Michael Jackson at Neverland until that year. And here she is seen confirming under oath in 2016 that her entire family, husband, parents, and kids, went on the trip to the Grand Canyon.
I understand that you stayed then 2 different weekends at Neverland on that trip, is that right?
Yes.
And then in between you and your kids and your husband and your parents all went on tourist trip to the Grand Canyon?
Yes.
So you were there, is it 2 nights the first time?
Yes.
And then you came back after your whole family had gone away?
Yes.
And you spent another, 2 nights?
At Neverland, yes.
Robson himself testified as an adult that the first time he visited Neverland without his mother was in 1992 or 1993, which means he would not have been alone at Neverland with Michael Jackson in 1990, as Leaving Neverland claimed.
SafeJeff claims that he was abused in a train station in the years before he turned 14, which was 1992, because he claims that after he turned 14, Jackson had lost interest. The tiny problem SafeCheck has is that the train station did not exist yet. The permit was not approved until 1993, and the train station did not open until 1994, when Jackson lived in New York.
Perhaps the most glaring fabrication in Leaving Neverland comes from accuser James SafeCheck, who clearly lied in the film by claiming he was sexually abused in the Neverland train station Michael Jackson had built to resemble the one at Disneyland. But there's a big problem with this story. A huge discrepancy in the timeline.
He says that one of the locations where Michael Jackson was abusing him on a daily basis was the Neverland train station. Right. And he vividly describes the interior of the train station. Now, this version of the story that he tells in the TV show places that abuse in the train station in 1988-89. The train station did not even open until 1994. And as you correctly say, in his sworn declarations, in his ongoing litigation with the estate, he says that Michael Jackson stopped molesting him when he was around 14 years old in 1992 because he got too old for him. Right. And the whole narrative of this film is that Michael Jackson molests boys, and then when the boys hit puberty and get too old, he then ditches them and moves on to a younger boy. That's the whole narrative that they're selling with this documentary. But when it's revealed that this location where Safechuck is describing his abuse it did not exist when he was the age he said he was, Dan Reed, the director of the documentary, goes onto Twitter and says, well, there's no dispute about when the train station was built, but what's in dispute is the dates of the abuse.
Right.
So James Safechuck was abused after the train station was built. Well, firstly, he's now accusing his own star witness of perjury, because James Safechuck has signed not one but two sworn declarations in which he states that Michael Jackson never abused him after 1992.
Right.
So in order to defend his documentary, he's throwing its star witness under the bus by calling him a perjurer, but also he's upended the entire narrative of his documentary.
These are just two proven lies out of dozens. The accusers' families are obviously biased parties in the case. Often they have been instrumental in creating allegations themselves. For example, Jordan Chandler made his allegations after his father, Evan Chandler, had pressured him into making these allegations so he could use it to get money from Jackson to finance his movie project. Yet Evan Chandler, nor any other family member for that matter, ever claimed to have witnessed the alleged molestations. Gavin Arvizo's brother, Star Arvizo, claimed to have witnessed Gavin's molestation, but their mother, Janet Arvizo, was known to coach her children to lie. The family had a history of fraudulent behavior and falsely testifying in court. For example, in the case of JCPenney. Jason Francia's mother, Blanca Francia, sold stories to the tabloid media and sued Jackson for money. Evidence shows she had told contradictory stories in different testimonies, and she had no problem spicing up innocent stories and turning them into something sinister when that served her purpose. Jason never made allegations until heavily biased police talked to him into remembering things that he did not have any memories of before. The Safechucks had a financial motive since their family company was sued for $800,000 in a business dispute right before James realized that he was allegedly sexually abused by Jackson. Because James's lawsuit did not get past the demurrer phase as of now, although the case is under appeal, he and his family were not yet deposed and cross-examined, since James started making allegations against Jackson. Safechuck's family never claimed to have witnessed the alleged molestation. Testimonies by Wade Robson's family, in particular by his mother Joy, actually inadvertently undermined a lot of Wade's allegations in his lawsuit. Robson's family never claimed to have witnessed the alleged molestation either. Then there are the disgruntled ex-employees of Jackson that the prosecution put on the stand to testify against him. All of these people proved to be untrustworthy, and their testimonies crumbled under scrutiny. They made up stories to sell them to tabloids or to monetize it in other ways through books, lawsuits, etc. Some of these witnesses were even proven to be liars, thieves, and fraudsters in court. Then there are so-called expert witness testimonies. During the 2005 trial, there were experts testifying about more technical subjects. All of them could be considered expert witness testimony, but none of them incriminated Jackson. There were also expert testimony that seemed pretty irrelevant to the case, such as a forensic accountant hired by the prosecution testifying about Jackson's finances and debt. The prosecution also put a psychologist called Anthony Joseph Equazo on the stand to testify about child sex abuse, who did not prove Jackson was guilty of sexually abusing anyone, but rather gave a general testimony about child sexual abuse. Equazo was paid by the prosecution for his testimony and admitted during cross-examination that false allegations of child sex abuse do happen. Jackson never admitted to sexually abusing children. In reality, he always vehemently denied it, both publicly and private. In addition, it is well documented that he did not think of sex between children and adults as loving or normal. He specifically condemned it. Jackson did say that he saw nothing wrong with sharing a bed or bedroom with unrelated children. Often when the critics run out of arguments, they base their guilty verdict on this without seeing any further need to research the case or understand the statement from Jackson's point of view.
Well, tell me, help me.
Because what's wrong with sharing a love?
You don't sleep with your kids or some other kid who needs love, who didn't have a good childhood?
No, I don't. I would never dream of sleeping.
I would.
I would never dream.
Because you've never been where I've been mentally.
It is completely understandable that this statement makes people feel uncomfortable. No one advocates sharing a bed with unrelated children, and it definitely was not Jackson's wisest decision to share his bedroom with unrelated children. Not because he was a predator, but because he is an extremely vulnerable target for extortioners considering his wealth, fame, naivety, and eccentricities. Possibly the biggest publicity backlash that Jackson has received because of this sharing your bed issue was after the airing of the 2003 documentary Living with Michael Jackson, where Martin Bashir interviewed Jackson over a period of several months. The infamous scene featured Jackson and his late accuser Gavin Arvizo holding hands while Jackson insisted that there was nothing wrong with sharing your bed with unrelated children. He said that whenever a child wanted to sleep in his bed, he would allow them, while he would sleep on the floor in a sleeping bag. He also said that sometimes he and the children, like Macaulay Culkin and his brother Kieran, had slept in the same bed, but he usually slept on the floor. Jackson also stated that he never asked children to come to his bedroom. He said, "We have guest units, but whenever kids come here, they always want to stay with me. They never want to stay in the guest rooms. I have never invited them into my room. They always want to just stay with me. They say, 'Can I stay with you tonight?' So I go, 'If it's okay with your parents, then yes, you can.'" At the 2005 trial, both the prosecution and the defense agreed that at the time of the Bashir interview, there was no other occasion of Gavin sleeping in Jackson's bedroom than the one time in 2000 when other people slept in the room as well. In the interview with Bashir, Gavin admitted that he had specifically asked Jackson to be allowed in his bedroom and sleep there with his brother Star.
There was one night I stood in and I asked him if I could stay in his bedroom. And he let me stay in the bedroom. And I was like, "Michael, you can sleep on the bed." And he was like, no, you sleep on the bed, sleep on the bed. We're like, no, you sleep on the bed. And then he finally said, "Okay, if you love me, you sleep on the bed." I was like, oh man. And so I finally slept on the bed. But it was fun that night.
I slept on the floor. Was it sleeping bag?
No, he packed the whole mess of blankets on the floor.
Despite of the public outrage and the media frenzy that went into all kinds of speculation about Jackson's relationship with Gavin because of that scene, few paid attention to what Jackson actually meant by sharing a bed. He meant giving up his bed to Gavin and his brother Star while he would sleep on the floor. Never in the interview is it claimed that Jackson and Gavin had slept in the same bed. In actuality, both state that Jackson slept on the floor, and at the 2005 trial, Gavin testified that Jackson's friend and personal assistant, Frank Cassio, had also slept in the room that night, as well as Gavin's brother Star and Jackson's two children, Prince and Paris. All the children slept in Jackson's bed, while the two adult men, Jackson and Cassio, slept on the floor. In Frank Cassio's book, My Friend Michael, An Ordinary Friendship with an Extraordinary Man, Cassio recalls that it were the Arvizo children who insisted that they wanted to sleep in Jackson's bedroom, despite the fact that Jackson was reluctant to let them. Gavin and Star kept begging. I kept saying no, and then Janet said to Michael, "They really want to stay with you. It's okay with me." Michael relented. He didn't want to let the kids down. His heart got in the way, but he was fully aware of the risk. He said to me, "Frank, if they're staying in my room, you're staying with me. I don't trust this mother. She's fucked up." I was totally against it, but I said, "All right, we do what we have to do." Having me there as a witness would safeguard Michael against any shady ideas that the Arvizos might have been harboring, or so we both naive were enough to think. Nevertheless, this is the scene in the Bashir documentary that caused worldwide uproar and speculation about the nature of Jackson's relationship with children. The picture the media painted of Jackson was that of a predator who lured children into his bedroom with the intent of sexually molesting them while keeping them away from their parents. In reality, Jackson's two-story bedroom was a gathering place for family, friends, and the parents of the children who were allowed to stay there as well. Even Jordan Chandler's mother, June, admitted in her testimony in 2005 that she was allowed to go into Jackson's bedroom and stay there whenever she wanted. Not only was June always allowed in the room where Jackson and Jordan were, even her brother and his wife would just walk into Jackson's bedroom unannounced, according to her testimony. In Joy Robson's 2005 testimony, she stated that she was allowed to go into Jackson's bedroom anytime she wanted to as well. In an interview that he gave to Larry King in 2004, Macaulay Culkin stated very firmly that all of those years that he had spent time with Jackson as a child, Jackson had never done anything inappropriate to him.
It's so weird, you know. What did happen? Nothing happened, you know. I mean, nothing really. I mean, we played video games, you know. We played it at an amusement park. Well, the thing is with that whole thing is that, you know, they go, oh, you slept in the same bedroom as him. It's like, I don't think you understand. Michael Jackson's bedroom is 2 stories. And it has like 3 bathrooms and this and that. So when I slept in his bedroom, yeah, but you have to understand the whole scenario. And the thing is with Michael is that he's not very good at explaining himself, and he never really has been, because he's not a very social person. I mean, you're talking about someone who's been sheltered and sheltering himself also for the last like 30 years, or you know, and so he's not very good at communicating to people and not very good at conveying what he's actually trying to say to you. And so when he says something like that, you know, people, you know, he doesn't quite understand why people react the way that they do.
I just watched a lot of things about him. I think, you know, somebody once reflected and said, you know, what Michael went through as a child, he had to grow up so fast that he related to what you went through as a child. And I think he, in a way, he was trying to protect you.
Yeah.
I mean, and I got something that was kind of profound. Did you feel that's true?
He reached out to me because a lot of things were happening, like, you know, big and fast with me. And I think he identified with that. I mean, at the end of the day, it's almost easy to try to say, oh, it was like weird or whatever, but it wasn't, because it made sense. Like we were legitimate. Like, here's the thing: at the end of the day, we were friends in the most simple.
And he was a child
kind of,
in many ways too. He didn't.
But also, like, we were just like. It's like one of my friendships that people question only because of the fact that he was the most famous person in the world. Like, like I'm friends. We're friendly. You know what I mean? And the more people wouldn't question that. Because we're friends.
Because we're in the same age.
You don't have to explain that. Also, you don't have to explain your friendships to people. Like, I mean, seriously, how many friendships have you had to really explain to people?
Not many.
That's what I'm saying. Like, it's just like
I think maybe do you think the age gap is probably why they question?
Yeah,
why
exactly.
would an older man? Why one? But only you would know.
Because what I said in the very beginning is that I was a peerless person. I was like, nobody else in my Catholic school even had like this much idea of what I was going through. Or what he was the kind of person who'd been through the exact same freaking thing and wanted to make sure that I wasn't alone.
A lot of people make this big deal about an alarm, that when you walk up to Michael Jackson's bedroom, you go along the corridor and an alarm goes off. That's completely true. Now, not only is that in Michael Jackson's house, since Michael's died, I've gone on to work for a lot of big superstars. They have alarms too, just the same thing. It's just a sensor walks along, just in case there's an intruder in the night, they can get to their escape route. Michael made sure that was all in place, his security team. So whenever you walk, alarm bells would go off in Michael's room to say someone's approaching. And that was for him to weigh up, everything okay, it's the middle of the night, and so on. They also go on about this abuse room, the sexual secret room, and that angers me a lot, because for a start, let's talk about Michael's bedroom. It's 2 stories, it is massive, it's the normal size of a house basically, and he does have a secret room, if you want to call it that. Now that room was built before he bought Neverland. He recorded a video called Say 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 with Paul McCartney there. It was called Sycamore Valley then, and he liked the property so much, he liked the ranch, he wanted to buy it. And it's quite standard for houses of that magnitude to have panic rooms. And they had a panic room already built in there. And that's what we're talking about here. We're not talking about an abuse room, a sex abuse room, anything like that. That was where Michael went when the alarms went off, or when head of security or someone on Neverland alerted him to something's not right. He would run to and shut himself in. And he would have stuff in there that would entertain him, because he could be in there for some hours waiting for the police to turn up and so on, because Neverland's in the middle of nowhere. So yeah, he would have what's Disney films and what may not be normal to normal people, but he ain't normal. He's Michael Jackson. He's been raised differently.
Another person who spent time with Jackson since an early childhood was Frank Cassio. Echoing Culkin's sentiments, in his book, Cassio also attested to the fact that the media often misrepresented this issue. Cassio wrote in his book, in Bashir's interview, Michael was holding Gavin's hand and telling the world that kids slept in his bed. Anyone who knew Michael would recognize the honesty and innocent candor of what he was trying to communicate. But Bashir was determined to cast it in a different light. What Michael didn't bother to explain, and what Bashir didn't care to ask about, was that Michael's suite in Neverland, as I've said before, was a gathering place with a family room downstairs and a bedroom upstairs. Michael didn't explain that people hung out there and sometimes they wanted to stay over. He didn't explain that he always offered guests his bed and for the most part slept on the floor in the family room below. But perhaps more important, he didn't explain that the guests were always close friends like us Cassios and his extended family. One of the biggest misconceptions about Michael, the story that plagued him for years following the Bashir documentary, was that he had had an assortment of children sleeping in his room at any given time. The truth was that random children never came to Neverland and stayed in Michael's room. Just as my brother Eddie and I had done when we were younger, the family and friends who did stay with Michael did so on their own volition. Michael just allowed it to happen because his friends and family liked to be around him. What Michael said on Bashir's video is true. You can have my bed if you want it. Sleep in it. I'll sleep on the floor. It's yours. Always give the best to the company you know. Michael had no hesitation about telling the truth because he had nothing to hide. He knew in his heart and mind that his actions were sincere, his motives pure, and his conscience clear. Michael innocently and honestly said, "Yes, I share my bed. There's nothing wrong with it." The fact of the matter is, when he was sharing his bed, it meant he was offering his bed to whoever wanted to sleep in it. There were many times when he slept up there as well, but he was usually on the floor next to his bed or downstairs sleeping on the floor. Although Bashir, for obvious reasons, kept harping on the bed, if you watch the full, uncut interview, it's impossible not to understand what Michael was trying to make clear. When he said he shared his bed, he meant he shared his life with the people he saw as family. Now, I know that most grown men don't share their private quarters with children, and those who do so are almost always up to no good. But that wasn't my experience with Michael. As one of those kids who, along with his brother, had any number of such sleepovers with Michael, I know better than anyone else what did happen and what didn't happen. Was it normal to have children sleep over? No, but it's also not considered especially normal for a grown man to play with silly string or have water balloon fights, at least not with the enthusiasm Michael brought to the activities. It's also not normal for a grown man to have an amusement park installed in his backyard. Do these things make such a man a pedophile? I'm quite sure the answer is no. The bottom line? Michael's interest in young boys had absolutely nothing to do with sex. I say this with the insatiable confidence of first-hand experience. The confidence of a young boy who slept in the same room as Michael hundreds of times, and with the absolute conviction of a man who saw Michael interact with thousands of kids. In all the years that I was close to him, I saw nothing that raised any red flags. Not as a child, and not as an adult. Michael may have been eccentric, but that didn't make him a criminal. The problem, though, was that this point of view wasn't represented in the documentary. Listening to Michael talk, people who didn't know him were disturbed by what he was saying, not only because his words were taken out of context, but also because Bashir was telling them that he should be disturbed. The journalist repeatedly suggested that Michael's statements made him very uncomfortable. Michael was quirky enough without the machinations of a mercenary newshound, to be sure. But there's no doubt that Bashir manipulated viewers for his own ends. His questions were leading, the editing misguided. As I watched the broadcast, it seemed to me that Bashir's plan all along had been to expose Michael in whatever way he could in order to win highest ratings he could for his show. It's also a misrepresentation that only boys slept in Jackson's room. Girls did too, as did adults. For example, William B. Van Valen, an adult heterosexual male in his family, befriended Jackson in the early 2000s. He wrote about staying in Jackson's bed a few times in his book entitled Private Conversations in Neverland. In Michael's room, there was a couch with a king-sized roll-out bed in it. It was always in the rolled-out position, and it was always turned down like you were in a hotel. It faced the biggest TV I'd ever seen at that time. We would put in a movie, order from the kitchen whatever we were hungry for, and watch movies until late. If Michael fell asleep while we were watching a movie, I would turn the volume down slowly, unplug it, because if I used the controller, it made a loud noise as it turned off, and quietly leave the room and go home. I remember I did this one night and was tiptoeing to the door when I heard Michael say, "See you tomorrow, Barney." For whatever reason, it was very difficult for Michael to sleep, so if he fell asleep, I was always careful to let him stay that way. Sometimes he'd ask me to read something to him, and I'd find a book and just read it out loud, then slip away when it seemed he was asleep. Besides all this, SafeCheck especially said he was upset that Jackson would have left the room when he woke up, admitting that Jackson would not even stay in the room after the children would fall asleep on his bed. It is very likely that on most occasions, Jackson would sleep in one of the guest rooms himself after giving up his own bed. So what did these sleepovers really mean for Jackson? According to German psychologist and psychotherapist Dieter Speck, Jackson assumed the dual roles of being a child and a father at the same time due to his childhood trauma, his loss of childhood, his father's abuse, etc. He saw himself in the children he surrounded himself with, and he wanted to give them the non-sexual fatherly affection and love that he never got from his own father.
Können Sie mir das erklären?
Das ist der einzige Punkt in diesem Interview, wo Michael Jackson wirklich gelogen hat und wo die Körpersprache bei ihm nicht stimmt. Alle anderen Dinge sind authentisch, von den Affekten her und glaubwürdig. Warum? Wir müssten uns darüber unterhalten, wer ist Michael Jackson wirklich? Und Michael Jackson wirklich ist ein extrem verwundbarer Mensch, ein Kind, jemand, der nie erwachsen geworden ist. Das Lebensalter 44 ist auf dem Papier 44. Und das Problem, was Martin Bashir mit ihm hat, gerade im Endteil dieses Interviews, ist, dass er zum Beispiel erwachsene Sexualität, der Vorwurf des Kinderschänders, verwechselt eigentlich mit kindlicher, noch nicht mal Sexualität. Er ist Kind unter Kindern. Das ist eigentlich der Punkt. Warum er das mit dem Gesicht...
Eine Frage vom Hobbypsychologen, also wirklich psychologischer Laie. Ist das ein Teil Schizophrenie?
Nein,
oder
überhaupt nicht. Wir müssen einfach gucken, und damit komme ich auf das Gesicht an, weil das ist ja in einem Verbund eigentlich zu sehen. Michael Jackson ist von seinem Vater brutalst misshandelt worden. So brutal, dass er Ohnmachtsanfälle bekommen hat, dass er erbrochen hat, dass er sich verkrochen hat. Dinge, die er in diesem Interview auch andeutet, dann nicht ausführt, wo Angst in seinem Gesicht ist, wo seine Mimik völlig authentisch ist. Und das hat ihn geprägt. Derselbe Vater hat noch vor 2 Jahren im Interview gesagt, es hätte seinem Sohn nicht geschadet und Eltern sollten ihre Kinder ruhig öfter schlagen. Und immerhin hätte er seinen Sohn so geschlagen, dass er jetzt eben die Nummer 1 im Pop-Business gewesen wäre. Vor diesem Vater hat er Angst gehabt. Auf der anderen Seite hat er immer die Liebe seines Vaters gesucht. Und derselbe Vater hat sich über sein Gesicht, über seine Akne, über seine Nase mokiert. Und er wollte dem Vater gefallen. Man würde sagen, eigentlich perverserweise oder paradoxerweise, weil er hat ja Angst gehabt, aber er hat die Liebe des Vaters nie bekommen. Und dieser Liebe läuft er zeitlebens hinterher. Und was er jetzt macht, ist, dass er Kinder um sich sammelt, selber Kinder haben will, um eigentlich diesen Kindern Vater zu sein. Er ist also Kind und Vater in einer Person. Und das, was er mit den Kindern macht, macht er eigentlich mit sich selber. Also im Herzen eigentlich ein ganz reiner, ein ganz guter, ein ganz gutmütiger, ein ganz naiver Mensch. Martin Bashir hat ihn abgezockt, er hat ihn ausgenutzt. Es ist Frau Ludewig, eine journalistische Glanzleistung, da würde jeder Journalist von träumen, aber der Preis ist eigentlich der Preis des Erschleichens von Würde und des Vernichtens einer Persönlichkeit, weil er nicht mit lauteren Mitteln gearbeitet hat. Und am Ende, wir merken es im Interview, wird es für Martin Bashir plötzlich eng. Und dann konfrontiert er. Das ganze Vertrauen, was er erschlichen hat, bricht zusammen, dann konfrontiert er. Und die Augen von Michael werden Schlitze. Sie sehen das. Er kriegt einen defensiven Gesichtsausdruck und er bricht am Ende ab, weil er merkt plötzlich, er ist reingelegt worden. Und deswegen gibt es jetzt den zweiten Teil, mit dem sich Michael Jackson wehrt und wo er eigentlich sagen will, Ich bin kein Kinderschänder. Und ich muss noch etwas sagen, Oliver Geissen. Ich selber bin damals bestürzt gewesen. Ich mag ihn als Performer, als Künstler. Er ist einer der größten Artisten, die wir einfach haben. Aber als diese Kinderschänder-Nummer kam, bin ich entsetzt gewesen. Und viele Radiostationen haben ihn eine Zeit lang nicht mehr gespielt. Nachdem ich das gesehen habe und mich mit seiner Biografie mehr beschäftigt habe und die Wurzeln gesehen habe, habe ich gesehen, er ist nicht der klassische Kinderschänder, der Kinder schändet, um seinen eigenen Lustgewinn zu befriedigen. Er ist also kein Pädophiler, sondern er ist eigentlich Kind, naiv. Er ist wirklich jemand, der sagt, er schläft nicht mit Kindern, er schläft bei Kindern. Und das ist ein Riesenunterschied. Weil, und auch das vielleicht abgerundet in einem Satz, weil eigentlich niemand bei ihm geschlafen hat, bei ihm war, ihn getröstet hat. Und das ist die tiefste Wunde in seinem Herzen, die er nun versucht zu schließen, indem er eigentlich das, was er selber nicht erfahren hat, an Kinder weiterzugeben.
Victims of child sexual abuse do not want to be around their abuser because they fear their abuser. Children know it is wrong when an adult sexually abuses them, but all the accusers wanted to stay with Jackson wherever he went. They started to dress like him. They looked up to him. June Chandler even claims in her testimony that Jordan didn't want to be with her and his sister anymore, but wanted to be with Michael Jackson. He was a 13-year-old boy with a crappy father who didn't pay any attention to him. As you can read in June's testimony, he was tens of thousands of dollars behind on his child support in addition. To Jordan, Jackson was the closest to a father figure he could have. To him, Jackson was not only a superstar, but he was taking on the dad role by actually paying attention to him, helping him with his homework, and playing video games with him. This pattern repeats itself with the other accusers, where the fathers were not around, either by their own choice or pushed away by the mothers who were clearly in love with Jackson, or they were complete deadbeats. If you care just a little bit about the truth, check out the facts for yourself, not the version of the mainstream media, because the media lies. And it's not just about Michael Jackson. Both the media and Hollywood are controlled by very wealthy people who do not want people to know their own evil dealings. Jackson was a threat to them because he knew their game, something he was very vocal about in his artistic work. And what do you do with a threat? You either make it disappear or you assassinate their character. No doubt that they attempted the first option, but when they didn't succeed, they stuck to the latter. They broke the man into pieces. That trial shouldn't have lasted a month longer, or it might have literally killed him. Michael Jackson had access to millions and probably even billions of dollars. If he really were a pedophile like the media in Hollywood wants you to think, you would have seen hundreds of victims pop up, if not thousands. Pedophiles molest on an average of hundreds of kids in their lifetime, yet no one has anything on him other than a bunch of discredited extortioners and their allegations, despite the fact that Jackson had been surrounded with people everywhere he went ever since he was a child himself. The accusers are doing a huge disservice to real victims of child sexual abuse. As divided as the Michael Jackson community sometimes is, when it comes to accusations of child molestation against Jackson, the community will always unite and form a huge army in his defense, and they are armed with knowledge that will break the allegations into tiny little pieces with military precision, simply because they know that much more about the allegations than anyone else. But to be able to defend him with so much passion, this army first had to investigate for themselves, since no one involved will ever defend someone who hurts children in any kind of way. We stand for victims, but that includes victims of false accusations. We did our homework, months of it, years of it, digging into every little detail and aspect of Jackson's life and the allegations. We have read all the court transcripts, depositions, articles, books, and watched every interview available, and could only come to one conclusion. The allegations, as we have all heard them, hold no merit at all. In fact, they have been debunked inside and out of court in so many ways that it's clear to anyone who takes the time to investigate for themselves that it's been a witch hunt ever since the first allegation hit the fan. We look beyond Jackson as the king of pop and his musical accomplishments We have come to know, appreciate, and love the man behind all of the hoopla. We have learned what he had to go through in life to get where he was, and the pain he endured while staying strong and full of love for humanity, giving away hundreds of millions of dollars to people and mostly children in need. Anyone who studies Michael Jackson, the man, and not the king of pop, would be as passionate as Michael's army in defending his name against atrocious allegations like these. Did he say stupid things? Sure. Did he make decisions that might not have been very smart? Of course he did. Was he weird? Sure. If anything out of the ordinary is called weird, call him weird if you like. But does that make him a pedophile? Absolutely not. It makes him human. Michael Jackson is not like the average person. The little things in our youths that defined us, that matured us, the things we take for granted, are things he never got to experience because he has worked ever since he was a small child. We could never even try to imagine what we would be like if we had grown up the same way Michael Jackson did. This is not just about defending Michael Jackson. This is about defending the truth and defending the innocence of a man that gave the world his life since he was 5 years old. A man that is not able to defend himself. What they did to him, they can do to you, to me, to our families, or anyone else for that matter who goes against the status quo. We cannot allow Michael Jackson to be found guilty in the court of public opinion. Not being able to prove his innocence does not mean he is guilty. It's not how the legal system works. If you accuse someone of a crime, you have to prove they are guilty. A defendant should never have to prove their innocence because, as stated at the very beginning of this video, it's not possible. Regardless of your belief regarding President Donald Trump, a scenario regarding his guilt was raised recently when Robert Mueller testified that he could not exonerate President Trump in the Russia investigation. Lawyers called the claim outrageous, simply because a person is innocent until proven guilty, and not the other way around.
DOJ policy or principle set forth a legal standard that an investigated person is not exonerated if their innocence from criminal conduct is not conclusively determined. Where does that language come from, Director? Where is the DOJ policy that says that? Let me make it easier.
Go ahead.
Can you give me an example other than Donald Trump where the Justice Department determined that an investigated person was not exonerated because their innocence was not conclusively determined?
I cannot, but this is a unique situation.
Okay, well, you can't. Time is short. I've got 5 minutes. Let's just leave it at you can't find it because I'll tell you why. It doesn't exist. The special counsel's job, nowhere does it say that you were to conclusively determine Donald Trump's innocence or that the special counsel report should determine whether or not to exonerate him. It's not in any of the documents. It's not in your appointment order. It's not in the special counsel regulations. It's not in the OLC opinions. It's not in the Justice Manual, and it's not in the principles of federal prosecution. Nowhere do those words appear together because respectfully, Director, it was not the special counsel's job to conclusively determine Donald Trump's innocence or to exonerate him because the bedrock principle of our justice system is a presumption of innocence. It exists for everyone,
including Michael Jackson, who was tried in court and found not guilty. This is why we stand for him.
I think the way to describe him, he was the biggest media manipulator there is in the world, where he could control the media in certain ways, and at the same time it would backfire on occasions, and no one wanted to tell him that it's the wrong thing to do. You know, this may look the wrong way from the public's point of view. He was an intelligent, smart guy, not some comic figure that people seem to think he is. He was an intelligent man, and intelligence is not shown. And I think that was maybe his biggest mistake. Had he shown the businessman Michael Jackson, which he did a little bit with the Beatles catalog decision and a few other wise moves he made, then they would understand him more. But yeah, he's misunderstood, and it's a shame that we're not celebrating his music and dance now on his 10th year anniversary of his passing and having to deal with stuff that's been dealt with. But he never really recovered from that. That broke his heart.
kind of.
Was he fun?
He was fucking awesome. He was hilarious. He was sweet. And like, yeah, no, people didn't know how funny he fucking was.
See, I envy you that. I envy you.
He liked prank calling people. He actually was really good with his voice, obviously.
Michael Jackson would prank call, and with you, you'd call some people.
Yep.
What would he say?
He always, I can't do his voices because obviously he was good with his voice. But he'd go like, no. He's like, how are you? And like, yeah, he's like, I'm good. Like, hi, do you already mattresses in your mattress store? Like, and he's like, and it was like, yeah, no, and he could do a really good, like, no, he was, he was fucking hilarious. Like people, I mean, he was charming, fucking funny, silly, like, yeah. And here's the thing is that, again, it goes back to something else I was saying, was that I really didn't actually give a shit about famous people. Because I was thoroughly unimpressed by them. So when I first met him, I'm like, okay, cool. You're just that guy. You're like, that guy who sings songs. Like, cool.
Great.
Like, yeah, I sing songs in school. That's great. So anyway, like, like,
but can I hang out with you? Probably not.
Yeah. So,
right?
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons also why we got along is that like everyone's always thoroughly impressed by him, and so the fact there was somebody who was kind of just like treated him like a normal person was kind of just like, yeah, like it was that simple. Was that like
he seems like a very like the most generous person.
Yeah,
too.
he was generous. He was gentle.
Do you still have any gifts that he might have given you?
Probably somewhere in the back of my house, but yeah, look. Yeah,
give you a birthday gift. Happy birthday.
Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, that's what I mean. For me, it's so normal and mundane. Like, I know it's a big deal to everyone else, but like for me, it's like, yeah, it was a normal, like, it was a normal friendship.